sa bukod, kanina pa nakasalanan ng dito.
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
This corruption in media, no introduced
Good evening, you're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. I'm Jing Magsaysay. Joining me tonight is Professor Ronnie Holmes, President and Managing Fellow of Pulse Asia. Hi Ronnie, good evening. Thanks for
Good
joining
evening,
me. All right, you have a new survey. This is coming out on Friday, but it's still the last survey you're going to do for the elections?
It will be. It is the last survey.
It is the last survey.
Yes, yes.
Is it by any means indicative of how the election results are going to be?
It is to a certain extent, but pretty limited extent, because you still have about, from the time that we conducted the survey, you still have about 2 weeks before elections. And if you look at the surveys that we've been conducting over the past 4 months, since January, you see a lot of movement insofar as ranking among people who are placed anywhere from the second to even down to the 20th position. And there are incremental movements, increases or decline in terms of preferences among the candidates within that range of ranks.
So anything can happen?
Anything can happen. And we've seen movements wherein people who were initially ranked on a straightforward rank 9 suddenly go up to 4th place, primarily because their preferences do not move, as against other candidates whose preferences are slightly and marginally declining.
Okay, this particular survey is very interesting because your survey, the Pulse Asia survey, is coming out together with the new SWS survey. In your survey, the Pulse Asia survey, Lauren is number 1, followed by Cheese Escudero, followed by Grace Po. She's now in number 3. Followed by Alan Peter Cayetano, Cynthia Villar, Antonio Trillanes, Bam Aquino, JV Ejercito. Nancy Binay is in number 9 with 34.6. Coco Pimentel, Edgardo Angara, and Mig Zubiri. In the SWS survey, you have Lauren Legarda, number 1, like in your survey. Alan Peter Cayetano, who is number 4 in your survey, is number 2 in SWS. Nancy Binay is number 3 in their survey, number 9 in your survey for Pulse. How do you account for the difference in the positions?
There may be differences in terms of sampling. There may be differences in terms of the method.
Okay.
Those differences are not known to us, per se.
Because you don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what you're doing.
I think there might be significant differences in terms of the sampling. For example, the way that you select subsequently the areas.
Okay.
We go straight to the municipalities and randomly select municipalities after dividing the country into subnational areas.
Okay.
I know that across reputable survey organizations, we cover all NCR cities and the sole municipality in NCR. But I don't know whether they go through the provinces, randomly select the provinces first, because in our case, we skip the provinces. Let's say when you talk about Western Visayas, instead of selecting among Aklan, Capiz, Iloilo, Negros Occidental, which province to take, what we do is that we go straight to the municipalities and select the municipalities. We skip the province. There's a difference there because your sample tends to be a bit more dispersed.
Okay.
We cover more municipalities. We have, I think, about close to 100, about 98 municipalities. And those differences mean that you cover larger areas, you tend to get a much more diverse preference. The other thing that should be noted is that maybe on the part of the media, to find out what the fill-out rate is.
Okay, what is fill-out rate?
Fill-out means that we all use a ballot. And we give it to the respondents. We ask the respondents to shade the names that they prefer on the ballot. And they're allowed to select up to 12.
Right.
So the maximum fill-out is 12.
Right.
What we've seen in our survey is that our fill-out rates have declined to an average of 8 from January to March. And it has declined further to 7 on the average. The mean is 7.
How do you know that?
You process the ballots, you find out how many ordinarily they shade, and only 7 names are shaded across the 1,800 respondents that we have. That means among 33 candidates, as a whole, on the average, there are only 7 names that are given. The less the names that they give, the lower the ceiling that you will get. For example, in our pre-election survey right now, the highest one is about 51%.
This is Lauren.
That's Senator Legarda,
Yeah.
a re-electionist. You can somehow look at it also as indicative of the maximum that some candidates in the past got in their actual votes in
Okay.
previous elections. For example, 2010 and 2007. If I'm not mistaken, in 2010, the top candidate was now Senator Revilla with about 19 million votes.
Right.
And it amounts to about, or more or less 50% of the total votes cast for the senator. So voters normally don't give 12 names. On the average, they give only 7 names.
Okay. Coming closer to the elections, you're saying that this last survey of yours, using that example from Revilla, Senator Revilla, will hew closely to what the election results are going to be?
In terms of proportion of votes,
Okay.
what we cannot in any way predict, Jing, is what will be the voter turnout in this election.
Correct.
And that would matter really. In 2007, voter turnout, and that was a midterm election, but you had 2 contending groups, Team Unity and the Genuine Opposition, if I'm not mistaken. Voter turnout was about 73%.
Yeah, because the groups are identified.
The groups were
very clearly identified.
demarcated.
Demarcated.
There was much tension.
Right.
Right? That's 2007. Even as a midterm election, it got 73% voter turnout. That's the COMELEC data. 2010, which was the presidential election, had 75%.
Yeah.
Now,
Because we know what that was all about. No?
it was
very,
still,
very
presidential elections normally
Yes,
generate
that's right.
higher voter turnout.
Yeah.
This is a midterm election. Maybe what we can do is try to forecast what essentially will be the turnout. Will people turn out more in 2013? And that will influence the total number of votes that will be cast for the senator.
Are there any indicators in your surveys?
Surveys, normally when we ask the question whether people voted in the past, it comes closer to the actual turnout. In our last survey last March, I have not checked the April, turnout in 2010 was 75%.
Yeah.
When we asked respondents whether they voted in the 2010 elections, we were getting about 82% saying that they voted. So it's not that far from the 75%. But when you ask a person whether you will vote, the tendency is to give the socially desirable response. Yes, I will vote.
Yeah.
And about 9 out of 10 will say that they will vote. But we all know that the voting turnout will be pretty much lower than that one. And it depends on the complexion of the contest. Right now, we're not really seeing that delineation between 2 groups that we saw in
Yes.
2007.
Not at all.
Not at all. There are 2 groups, but the 2 groups do not necessarily
They don't have-
distance themselves.
Correct. They
In
don't
the-
have identifying personalities.
Yes.
Well, let's go back to very interesting. I'm still interested in the results of the difference in the results of the 2 surveys of SWS and Pulse. And you were saying that the differences may be because of the areas that are covered by the survey.
The sampling,
The sampling,
not the
no?
areas.
The sampling, okay.
method. Yeah.
The sampling. Can you influence the results of the survey by the areas that you sample?
You cannot influence, especially if you select them randomly, regardless of the sampling method.
Okay.
You do not purposefully say, for example, oh, I'll take only these provinces, or I'll take these municipalities. If you select the areas randomly, then there is no bias in terms of the selection.
Okay. When you say randomly, how is that done?
All the municipalities are listed.
Okay.
So as I said, for example, when you talk about NCR, we cover all cities in NCR. So the selection in NCR is not which city we will cover. It's a question of which barangay
Okay.
in Manila,
Okay.
let's say with more than 800 barangays, would eventually be selected. So all the barangays are listed,
So
and they're
for
randomly selected from that list.
so for all intents and purposes, Metro Manila is like the Philippines.
Well, we cover Metro Manila, but it's not essentially representative of the Philippines.
No, I mean in terms of sampling.
In terms of
you treat it
sampling.
like the Philippines.
Yeah, it's treated like the Philippines, and then the barangays are the municipalities.
Okay. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
Or cities.
All right.
And it's the same thing, let's say, when we talk about Central Luzon. We determine, because you list down, our basis will be the voting data,
Okay.
registered voters, which was released by the COMELEC fairly early for this election. NCR has 12% of the total voting population. Our sample for our surveys is 1,800. So 12% of 1,800, we round it off to about 210 respondents for NCR.
Okay.
And then for NCR, we list down all the 16 cities but plus the single municipality, look at their population and what is the proportion of the population to the total.
Okay.
You distribute those 210 respondents to the proportion, based on the proportion of the
Okay.
share of the population of, let's say, Quezon City,
All right.
which is the biggest,
All right.
the city with the biggest voting population.
Where do you get those guys?
You get those guys from barangays. You have a listing of barangays and you randomly select the barangays based on numbers that are assigned.
Okay.
You generate the numbers and then you identify the barangay.
Okay.
And then from that barangay, we're supposed to get 5 respondents. The basis of that,
How is that choice made, Ronnie? Like from a list of barangays, how do you end up with 10, for example?
the number of barangays to be selected, because we have what we call a spot.
Yeah.
Each spot, which is the lowest area, we're supposed to get 5 respondents. So in each barangay, 5 respondents. How is that barangay selected again? There's a list of barangays, and then you generate the number randomly, and then each barangay is assigned a number.
Okay.
So
All right.
when that
All right.
barangay,
Okay.
when that number is
All right.
known, then that barangay is the one
Okay.
that is selected.
All right. All right. So it's a number. It's a number
Yes.
that you choose.
It's a number that you
Okay.
choose. You generate
All
it
right.
normally
Okay.
to the computer, and it's without any bias.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this same method applies to nationwide.
That applies to
Selection,
nationwide.
yeah.
Let's say, let's talk about Southern Tagalog or Region 4A. Region
Okay.
4A has many provinces, right? Cavite, Batangas, Laguna. Let's say we selected a municipality in Cavite, Bacoor, and then another municipality in Laguna, Calamba, and then another municipality, let's say in Quezon, Sariaya. Then you list those areas that were randomly selected. You check what is the proportion of their share of the total voting population, and then you assign the number of respondents or spots. And then you go again and select barangays, like randomly.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the process some more. We'll take a short break. News Cafe will return after these reminders. We're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel, and we're still joined by Professor Ronnie Holmes of Pulse Asia. Ronnie, thanks for joining us again.
It's a privilege.
Let's talk about surveying is a science. It's a very exact science, would you say?
It's there's rigor to a survey.
Okay.
You need to follow the norms of a survey. Everything from constructing the questionnaire, drawing the sample, analyzing the data, and writing up the report.
Okay, let's go back to the sampling. So you do your sampling method, random sampling method for NCR and for the entire Philippines. And when you have all these areas that you want to cover with your survey, how secure is this information before you do the survey itself? What's the time span between knowing where you're going to do the survey and doing the actual survey?
The normal time span is about anywhere between 24 to 48 hours before we actually conduct the field work.
Okay.
So the knowledge of the areas to be sampled is restricted. There are less than a handful of people who know all the areas that we're going to.
Okay.
And then the people who will do the field work will only know what area, what barangay they're going to on the day itself, the
Okay.
morning of the survey.
All right. One by one. In Pulse Asia, how many people are aware of the areas to be covered?
Only 2 of us,
You and?
and our chief research fellow,
Okay.
Dr. Tabunda.
All right. Only 2 people. And no one else knows of the areas.
None before
And you-
the survey field work starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a list that is disseminated on the morning of the survey fieldwork? Is that correct?
Our data collection partner also has the list.
Okay.
So, if I'm not mistaken, there are 1 or 2 people in our with our data collection partner who would also know the sample.
The areas.
The areas.
And they get it 48 hours before?
They get it, we draw it up 24 to 48 hours before.
Okay.
We finalize it 24 to 48 hours before. And then our data collection partner disseminates to the field the areas that they have to go to the night before they actually go to those barangays.
Okay. Your data collection partner, how secure is the information with your data collection partner?
It's pretty secure because in the same manner that information is restricted in our case, that's the same thing that applies also with our data collection partner.
Is there any way, for example, that your data collection partner can reveal the information to a political party?
It will be quite difficult. And the other thing, Ching, and even if it were revealed, I think there is no use in terms of tampering with those areas because you're talking about a difference of about 24 hours. It's much more costly on their part to even intervene. There have been insinuations in the past that that has happened. We're very careful also. We're very sensitive, and this is part of the training that is given to our interviewers, to be quite sensitive to any extraordinary occurrence in the areas. Because you're talking about barangays. You're talking about a cluster of barangays. Let's say in Manila, there are only 3 barangays in District 1 to be selected. District 1 will probably have about 100 barangays. You're talking about 15 respondents. Once you get to know where in Manila we're going to, you're really looking at a total number of areas that even candidates fail to barnstorm for the entire campaign of 90 days.
Right, understood. In terms of operations, so you have the information 48 hours before. How can you disseminate that information? How can you plan the survey, inside of 2 days? Because you yourself don't know where you're going to do the survey until 2 days before.
The 2-day period, the second to the last day before the survey, there's normally a training of interviewers. You go to the questionnaire, everyone goes to the questionnaire, each question is read. There are certain revisions, if necessary, to the questions. At the end of the training, they're already positioned in areas that are close or proximate to the probable areas that they will go to. So the dissemination is quickly done by our data collection partner. In each area, you have field offices and field coordinators. So the interviewers themselves will find out where they will go to the morning before. The field coordinators will know the night before.
So your data collection partner has offices in all provinces of the country?
They have offices in key cities that are strategically located. Let's say, for example, when we do training, we had training, simultaneous training, one in Manila, another one in Central Visayas, another one in Western Visayas, and the last one in Southern Mindanao. So those are Davao, Cebu, Iloilo, and Metro Manila. And then the process really is that when they go into field work, the closest area is the first one that they probably will go into. Because there are other areas, let's say in Mindanao, they might go to Tacurong, they might go to Isabela City in Basilan. So that's why if you look at the schedule of interviews, in some areas, let's say in Metro Manila, we can start on the first day. In Cebu, we can start on the first day in Central Visayas. But in other areas, the field work is done on the second or the third day of a 5-day stretch when we complete the survey. So that's what is done. They need not necessarily be far from where they're located, and they can begin in areas that are more proximate, that are easy to access from the area that they're coming from.
So all the respondents, no, not the respondents, all the interviewers are deployable within 2 days?
Within a span of, within a span of 24 hours.
24 hours, actually.
Soon after the training, it will take only about a day or two before we start the field work. And the field work is scheduled in such a way that you're able to cover all the randomly selected areas within a span of 3 to 5 days, depending on how fast our turnaround time is.
All right. So that answers a lot of questions no? For people who are thinking, paano operations nun? If 48 hours lang, magpapadala pa sila ng tao sa probinsya, hindi naman alam yung lugar, things like that. No? Let's go to the questions. How do you format your questions? Are there basic questions in every survey? Like, for example, sinong iboboto nyo? That's one question.
There are basic questions. There are questions that we've asked longitudinally. It's the same question that we've asked. With regard to the senatorial preference, for example, the question really is just, we had the ballot, and then we asked them to follow the instructions in the ballot, which are printed in a replica of the ballot. And if the elections were held today, who they would vote for senator, they can give 12 names, and for the party list, they can select one. They're given the ballot. They shade, they check, they express their preference on the ballot with whatever mark that they choose, even violating the instructions that are found there. Then they put this in a sealed envelope. They return it to the interviewer, and the interviewer doesn't know who their preferences are, what preferences they indicate. When we get those ballots, we check whether the intent is consistently marked. In the common rule, you have to shade significantly the oval.
Right.
Our rule right now is that we want to just find intent.
Okay.
So when someone checks all the ovals consistently, that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's an ambiguous mark in the common rule of 2010. There's none that has been stated so far. It will not be read by the PCOS machine.
By the PCOS, yes.
But we are not really as stringent as the PCOS
because that's for
machine.
the PCOS. No?
Once the intent is expressed in a consistent mark, we'll count it as a preference. We do segregate it as an ambiguous mark, but it's counted as a preference. But you still count it?
Yes. Okay.
So,
okay, go ahead.
So that's a standard question.
Okay. What other questions do you ask in the survey?
There were questions in the past that we asked with regard to, let's say, awareness of coalitions. Also, with respect to, let's say, whether people agree, whether they're aware of the reproductive health bill, whether they agree with the reproductive or disagree with it, whether they will vote for someone who has supported or vote against someone or will not vote for someone who supported the RH bill. Those questions are our own questions.
And how do you determine the questions?
There are rules in questionnaire design that you have to follow. Number one, the questions have to be simple.
Yeah.
Our controlling language is Filipino.
Yeah.
So the question is written in Filipino first, translated into English.
What about the subject?
The subject itself is something that is either, from our end, salient to be probed into. To be probed, basically. And we recognize that there are certain issues that may be relevant at a particular time. And may influence voting behavior, or for which we need to generate opinion. Like example, in the last March survey, while it was delayed, we took a survey in terms of public opinion on gun control. We shared the advocacy with regard to eliminating forms of violence that can be actually eliminated by means of regulation. So we tuck it into the survey. That's our own question, and then we release that one. So it's either an academic or something that we feel we should get the public's pulse. Now, the rule in question design is that all questions have to be simple. When you have choices given to the respondents, or even before you ask for their opinion, you should check whether they're aware of an issue, because you should segregate the opinion of those who say that they're not aware. They only got to find out about the issue at the time that the survey was conducted. And those who are aware, sometimes we even probe in terms of their level of knowledge of the issue.
Can someone come to you and say, can you ask these questions for me or for us, let's say a political party, and pack it onto your survey? They
can. We normally call it a rider question, but we don't allow them to phrase the question without any modification, following the norms of how to construct a survey question.
And they pay for it?
They will pay for it. That's what you call a commission rider question. That's supposed to be kept under an embargo
Yes.
for a period of at least 1 year.
Okay. This is for their private consumption.
This is for their private consumption. We won't release it to the public. They're also bound by the embargo not to release it to the public.
What about commissioned surveys, the entire survey that's commissioned?
There have been cases when we've been commissioned by entities, not only politicians.
And these are not released?
These are not released.
Surveys conducted by, commissioned by media, done by you?
Yes. For example, we've done exit polls before, which was
Right.
commissioned by media.
Yeah.
We don't release it.
Okay.
It's the
It's the media entity that
it's
releases
the media
the results.
entity that will release it, and we keep all other information also on embargo, even the ones that have not been released for a period of 1 year.
The surveys that you come out with, this survey, for example, did anyone commission this survey?
Now, once we publicize a question, that means those are questions that we drew up on our own. Those are questions that we ask because, well, no one has commissioned it.
Yeah.
These are questions that we regularly ask, and we are bound to disseminate.
Where do you get the funding for the surveys?
The
How
funding,
much the survey costs, for example?
funding for surveys generally come from our own earnings from various sources. Income can also be generated by means of doing other research work. While we're known as for the surveys that we publicize,
Right.
we're not limited to surveys alone. However, our bylaws and our mandate really is to conduct regular surveys outside of the electoral surveys that come on monthly from January. We do have the quarterly surveys, Jing, that you know of, the
Okay,
Ulat ng Bayan.
so you have the money to do the survey. Why do a survey in the first place?
When Pulse Asia was created, it was basically a commitment on the part of a number of academics. We're all academics. We all belong to separate academic institutions. That it is of interest for us to generate public opinion. The
Okay.
opinion that we normally hear is the opinion of the elite. If we really want to
Or media.
commentators that essentially would express their own
Right.
opinion. The public deserves to be heard. Their right, freedom of expression has to be also secured. So it's a commitment. There are occasions when we agree, there are occasions when we disagree with public opinion, but we cannot in any way mute the public. So that was the intent of Pulse Asia from the very beginning. Fortunately, we've been able to sustain it for the last 13 years. And it's an important thing. It's one way of indirect political participation.
Right.
Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with the public, that's how they perceive certain issues, then that behooves many other groups to try to intervene in ways that will either shape public opinion.
Well, as the last question, I don't know if you have an answer for this question, Ronnie, but do you think the results of your survey, which are released today, April 30, conducted on April 22, 2022, will change?
I do think so.
Drastically?
I think there's a possibility that it will drastically change. We're at the tail end of a campaign. What we've seen in our survey really is that much of the information that voters know about candidates come not from news reports, but from political advertisements.
Right.
I don't know what messages they will deliver. I don't know how frequent those messages will be and what traction that will have in terms of voters. With 2 weeks to go, it's going to be very difficult to say that it will not change, primarily because we've also seen changes from our pre-electoral surveys from November 2011 or more recently from January 2013 to the present survey. You've seen movements of people, regardless of the survey that you read, people who were ranked 12th suddenly go up to 4th, or people who were ranked 4th suddenly slid to
Right.
9th place.
And so these are the results we're seeing before the end game.
Before the end game, and the end game sometimes is more critical. That might be the time when you will have more news reports,
Exactly.
either positive or disparaging.
Yeah.
And as those news reports resonate to the public, it will influence their disposition. Right now, they're giving us 7 names. They might have a much more firmer preference for certain names, but other names they might just simply replace with the other candidates. And it's uncertain, given that you really have a very low fill-out rate.
Ronnie, always very good talking to you. Thanks for coming to the program.
Thank you also, Jane.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left. I'd like to thank my guest, Professor Ronnie Holmes of Pulse Asia, for being with us tonight. Join us again next Friday for another 360-degree discussion right here on News Cafe. I'm Jig Magsaysay. Salamat po. Is number one, followed by Cheese Escudero, followed by Grace Poe. She's now in number 3. Followed by Alan Peter Cayetano, Cynthia Villar, Antonio Trillanes, Bam Aquino, JV Ejercito. Nancy Binay is in number 9 with 34.6. Coco Pimentel, Edgardo Angara, and Mig Zubiri. In the SWS survey, you have Lauren Legarda, number 1, like in your survey. Alan Peter Cayetano, who is number 4 in your survey, is number 2 in SWS. Nancy Binay is number 3 in their survey, number 9 in your survey for Pulse. How do you account for the difference in the positions?
There may be differences in terms of sampling.
Saka sa bukod, hindi ba nakasalanan ng video?
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
This corruption in media, no introduced
Good evening, you're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. I'm Jing Magsaysay. Joining me tonight is Professor Ronnie Holmes, President and Managing Fellow of Pulse Asia. Hi Ronnie, good evening. Thank you.
There may be differences in terms of the method.
Okay.
Those differences are not known to us
okay.
per se.
Because you don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what you're doing.
I think there might be significant differences in terms of the sampling. For example, the way that you select subsequently the areas.
Okay.
We go straight to the municipalities and randomly select municipalities after dividing the country into subnational areas.
Okay.
I know that across reputable survey organizations, we cover all NCR cities and the sole municipality in NCR. But I don't know whether they go through the provinces, randomly select the provinces first, because in our case, we skip the provinces. Let's say when you're joining.
All right. You have a new survey. This is coming out on Friday, but it's still the last survey you're going to do for the elections?
It will be. It is the last survey.
It is the last survey.
Yes, yes.
Is it by any means indicative of how the election results are going to be?
It is to a certain extent, but pretty limited extent, because you still have about, from the time that we conducted the survey, you still have about 2 weeks before elections. And if you look at the surveys that we've been conducting over the past 4 months, since January, you see a lot of movement insofar as ranking among people who are placed anywhere from the 2nd to even down to the 20th position. And there are incremental movements, increases or decline in terms of preferences among the candidates within that range of ranks.
So anything can happen?
Anything can happen. And we've seen movements wherein people who were initially ranked on a straightforward rank 9 suddenly go up to 4th place, primarily because their preferences do not move, as against other candidates whose preferences are slightly and marginally declining.
Okay, this particular survey is very interesting because your survey, the Pulse Asia survey, is coming out together with a new SWS survey. In your survey, the Pulse Asia survey, Lauren